Hi, I'm Brenton Goodman. Today we're going to talk about illegal immigration. Immigration has been a topic that individuals have been talking about since before Trump's first term, but especially now, as the Trump administration is doing all they can to deport as many non-citizens as possible. Oftentimes, when people have these discussions about illegal immigration, they talk about what rights it is that non-citizens should have or do have. So what we're going to do here today is give you the information that you need to allow you to make these decisions for yourself. So let's get into it. What is a right? A right is either a moral or legal privilege that we as a society deem should be provided and protected to each individual. Now, we have different kinds of rights in the United States. We have normal rights and we have fundamental rights. A fundamental right is something that we say is so necessary to our society, is so needed for a fair and just place to live that we cannot be without it and we have to protect it at all costs. This is something that some say is God-given and some say is just a universal truth. But in all, a fundamental right is a right that we say must be the most protected. One such fundamental right is that of due process. Due process can be found in the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, where it says that each person cannot be denied life, liberty, or property without due process. Now, why do we have this and why do we say that it's important? Well, due process itself is just the idea that if anyone is persecuted by the government or the government goes after them in any way, you should have the ability to do two things. You, one, get notice as to what they are going after you for, and two, you get the right to be heard to try to explain why the government is wrong. Now, all persons are given that right to due process, especially when it relates to life, liberty, and property. Now, this has also been stressed by the courts throughout the centuries, and even Justice Samuel Alito has said that illegal immigrants and non-citizens do in fact get due process rights. But not all due process is equal. There's a difference between criminal due process and civil due process. If we're going to take away your liberty and put you in prison, we're going to make sure that you have the right to an attorney whether you can afford it or not. We're going to make sure that you have to be Mirandized and know your rights before you speak. And we're going to make sure that the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you did what they said you did. In civil matters, where your liberty isn't at stake, but there are other rights that we deem kind of less important. So like if you're suffering a fine for jaywalking, we say, okay, the government doesn't have to afford you the ability to have an attorney if you can't pay for one. We don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but only by preponderance of the evidence, and so on and so forth. So these different standards are put together because we say, look, sometimes we have to be able to either make due process a little lighter for efficiency's sake or for speed's sake because there's so many cases going through the system, or sometimes it's just the idea that fairness comes in different ways. You don't have to have the same process to get the same fair and just outcome. So when it comes to non-citizens and illegal immigration, who makes the decisions as to what kind of due process is necessary? Well, under Article 1 of the Constitution, that is Congress. Now, Congress can also delegate or give some of its power to the executive branch and the presidency, which also sometimes, if they can formulate it correctly, has some powers as the commander-in-chief and the individuals that runs parts of foreign policy. But for the most part, Congress is who makes the powers. Now, what has Congress said about illegal immigration? It has said that criminal acts in terms of illegal immigration entail things like illegal entry, so not going in through a port of entry and just trying to cross the border wherever. Illegal re-entry, where you've been sent out and then you come back in. Not abiding by a removal order, which says that you're supposed to leave and you don't. And then giving immigration officers false or misleading information. Those are all criminal. Now, what is commonly a misconception is that just being illegal in the United States is not a crime. If you arrived here on a visa, if you were here on a work permit, if you were here on temporary protected status, if you were here as some sort of delegation from some other country, but then you lost those privileges and you still remain in the country, it's not a criminal violation, it's only a civil violation. So you're not a criminal, you're just here undocumented and can be fined for that. Now, how do we approach deportation specifically? We do it through two ways. One is expedited removal. The idea of expedited removal came about in 1996 through a congressional act. And what it says is that if you are an individual who has been here for less than 2 years and are undocumented, you can be subject to expedited removal. Now, this has been expanded by the Trump administration this year to be the law across the United States. And what you get from that, you don't get to go to court and go in front of a judge. All you get is the ability to go in front of a particular immigration officer and try to plead why you should be able to remain in the country. Now, if you are not subject to expedited removal, you fit within an exception like you came here on a visa, or you are unaccompanied minor, so you came here by yourself without an adult. In those cases, and in other cases, you can go to immigration court. In immigration court, that's more like a normal due process that we recognize in civil and criminal courts, where there is a judge and there is evidence, but the evidentiary standards are much more relaxed. For example, in document cases, if you present a document from the state, normally you have to show that it's authenticated and that it is accurate. In immigration courts, they just assume that the state is giving an authentic document. Additionally, you do not necessarily get the privilege of being able to get hearsay out of any case against you. In criminal and civil court, there must be an exception to hearsay, but in immigration courts, hearsay can get involved. What is hearsay? It's simply a statement made by a third party outside of the court that goes directly to your case. So if an officer comes in and says, John Doe said that Brenton Goodman is an illegal alien, I don't have the ability in an immigration court to confront that fact, whereas in a civil or criminal court, I would have the ability to do so. Not to mention, I'm not entitled, if I'm an undocumented individual, to an attorney unless I can afford one myself. And I'm also, at least not according to the courts these days, entitled to have parole or be bonded out while I await my hearings. If the government wants, they can detain me until there is a final judgment. So all of these show that non-documented individuals do have due process, but just in a different manner than us as citizens would see it. Not to mention, even if you are documented and a citizen, you can still be subject to deportation. So for instance, Marco Rubio with this current administration has withdrawn thousands of visas, according to his own words, from students and others because they either committed crimes, according to him, or they took part in actions like protests at universities that take away from the ability of others to practice and learn and be a part of a greater community. And he says that had they said that that was their intention, that they're going to spread what he calls misinformation, that they would have never gotten a visa in the first place. Not to mention, you can also have things like your temporary protected status revoked. So for instance, Venezuelans received a temporary protective status from Joe Biden, but after he left and when President Trump came in, he removed that protected status, and now 350,000 Venezuelans are subject to being deported. So, is this something that's proper? Should individuals be able, if they're non-documented, to have due process? The Trump administration says no. They say citizens should have the benefits of due process and these fundamental rights, but not non-citizens. By being non-citizens, they shouldn't have the same rights as everyone else. And that these ideas of due process applying to them only works to slow down the government's mission, which is to get rid of rebel rousers and criminals from the United States. Opponents say, look, due process is fundamental. It's universal. It belongs to everyone, and it needs to be applied to everyone. This is a principle of the United States, and this is what our foundation is, and we should safeguard it, especially for the most vulnerable, who they say are these individuals who are non-documented. And they would claim that a lot of them aren't criminals and are not individuals that are rebel rousers, but merely just those who are really in need and come from desperate situations that require us to help. So, do you think non-documented immigrants have enough rights? And what do you think about those rights? Well, you decide. I'm Brenton Goodman, And thank you for joining me today. I hope you like and subscribe and leave a comment for us down below.